Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a variety of topics through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may apply to white-collar employees and their employers, the ideas presented here can truly be applied to a wide variety of industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applied outside of the workplace. I invite you to examine the ideas presented here, apply what works for you, and simply discard the rest. The topic of meetings can be quite interesting in that sometimes we have a love-hate relationship with meetings, meaning there's a wide spectrum of where people fall in terms of how they feel about meetings. Before the pandemic, meetings have gotten to a point where many people complained about their length, frequency, and a general lack of focus. And while meetings are important and they certainly serve their purpose, they can be invaluable in many, many situations. Given the opportunity to run wild, so to speak, meetings can become nothing other than distractions and time wasters in certain situations, in far too many situations. Once the pandemic became part of our reality, meetings came to a screeching halt. We had to figure out other ways of connecting with one another, and virtual connections became much more prominent than they had been before. Software options like Zoom or Google Meet became the norm for connecting with others within our workplaces. The pandemic brought with it a whole new set of concerns. While before the pandemic, some of the biggest challenges when it came to meetings was too many, too long, too frequent. Now that the pandemic shut down many businesses and forced many people to work virtually, we became concerned with being disconnected from one another. So we embraced the virtual meeting technology. Before we knew it, we were right back to where we started. Meetings, now in their virtual format, became too frequent, too long, and sometimes unnecessary. One may wonder why, once meetings came to a halt with the pandemic, we found a way of bringing meetings back to where they were before the pandemic, where many people felt the meetings were too frequent, too long, and too unfocused. There are many speculations on that part of the topic, and maybe it's just because as humans we have this need to connect with one another, but that's a topic for another episode. However, having had that realization brings us the perfect opportunity to hone in on some of the best practices when it comes to meetings that will allow us to make meetings as efficient as possible. Remember, change often brings with it the opportunity for growth and improvement, and meetings are no different. Today's workplace reality includes people who work on-site, people who work virtually, and people who have a hybrid type of work schedule where sometimes they're at the office and sometimes they work virtually. What that means to us in terms of meetings is that we need to be able to define meetings in such a way that they accommodate everybody. Once again, this gives us the perfect opportunity to improve on the old-fashioned meeting. To some degree, meetings allow us to make connections with others, and that's important. As humans, we are social creatures by nature. We need to have relationships and connect with others. However, it is that very component of some meetings that may allow the meetings to get out of hand, run away in terms of frequency and time, and sometimes a loss of focus or purpose. So we have to be very mindful of that. So, while it is very important to connect with others, we should schedule meetings that focus solely on that rather than mix and match the purpose of our meeting. When we have a meeting with a goal and a purpose, it should not also include a socialization component to it. At least that should be minimized. Very much the least part of that meeting, because that is what can contribute to the meeting becoming something other than what it was intended to be. Scheduling meetings for the purpose of socialization is a whole different topic and certainly has a time and a place and should be done on a regular basis as a separate event. Besides separating meetings that have more of a socializing component or social purpose from other types of meetings, there are some other simple, straightforward best practices that can help everyone to get the most out of their meetings. First and foremost, meetings should always be scheduled only as a last resort. Let me explain what I mean. If you can convey an idea or a set of ideas or information in a way that does not require a meeting, so for example, an email, a memo, a PowerPoint presentation, or a video presentation, then reconsider scheduling the meeting. People can read the memo or read the email or look at the PowerPoint presentation or the video presentation on their own time. Certainly you can give certain timeline for people to consume the information, but at least they can do it on their own time to some degree. Therefore, not having to attend a meeting will not interrupt their day, will free up their time a little more. So meetings really should be scheduled as a last resort. Meetings should have a definite purpose and a goal, even if that purpose or goal is for brainstorming or a creative session to come up with some new ideas. Then even that should be a very clear purpose for the meeting, very clear goal. Never go into a meeting without a solid purpose and a solid goal or set of goals. Meetings should have an agenda or an itinerary. Know what you're going to cover in that particular meeting before you get there, before you begin the meeting. And it's not a bad idea to share that agenda with meeting attendants before the meeting begins. That way, everyone knows what to expect and people don't bring irrelevant ideas to the meeting. Efficient meetings should be structured. That way, you allot time for different components to a meeting, including a Q&A section if that's appropriate. This allows for meetings to go more smoothly and to stay on schedule. That brings me to the next best practice. All meetings should be timed. Never go into a meeting without knowing how long it should last. Generally speaking, try to keep meetings to under half an hour at most. First of all, people start to get antsy and lose interest if you make them sit there for hours on end. But also it can feel very time wasteful when people have to sit through long meetings. So it's best to keep the meeting to half an hour, at the very most to an hour. Of course, these are general rules. There may be some exceptions. Some meetings may be shorter, maybe 10-15-minute power meetings. Those are great too. Focus on keeping your meeting as efficient as possible. Stick to the time schedule, stick to the itinerary, stick to the topic. Don't go off on side tangents. You want the meeting to be as efficient as possible because that will help the meeting to be as productive as possible. Another good practice is to keep a record of the meeting. This may be in the form of notes, or perhaps a meeting could be recorded, such as many of the virtual meetings. Those tend to be recorded oftentimes. Sometimes you may have a transcript from the meeting. This is a good idea because it allows you to go back to check content, ideas, what was discussed, what was presented. And making that content available to meeting participants is always helpful. And of course, the other good thing about that is that you can make the content of the meeting available to those who did not attend it. And of course, it's important to have a facilitator for every meeting. That helps you to keep the meeting on track, keep everybody focused, keep the meeting moving forward. So it's very important that one person facilitates the meeting. Another consideration is who you invite to the meeting. Only invite those people who need to be there. You can make the meeting attendance optional for some people, but only request that those who absolutely have to be there attend the meeting. It's important to stay focused and on topic. This sounds like such a simple suggestion, but not being able to stick to that is what causes many problems with runaway meetings that tend to go on for far too long than they need to. There are a couple of meeting options that are worth your consideration. First, make it an option for people to attend the meeting either in person or virtually. This allows for greater flexibility. That way people feel more in control of their own schedule and more relaxed and more able to participate in the meeting properly. Another good consideration for meetings is a walking meeting. You may have heard of this, as Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, was famous for his walking meetings. So whether you walk with a group of people or incorporate a treadmill for those attending virtually, if that's what they want to do, walking meetings can be a wonderful option. They are far less boring in terms of your physical experience. They get the blood going, they get the brain working, get creative ideas and thinking going. So consider having a walking type of meeting every now and then when the conditions are right and when people have that option or opportunity to join in such a way. A couple of final thoughts on making the best out of your meeting, making your meeting most efficient. Don't let the meeting become a runaway train. Stay on track, stay in control, stay focused. Continue to facilitate the meeting throughout the entire meeting so that everyone stays focused. Don't allow new topics to be introduced and become side tangent that take you down rabbit holes. Don't allow people to take over in terms of time or topic, but rather stay focused on the topics and goals at hand. And remember to keep track of time. You'd want the meetings to stay as close as possible to the predetermined meeting time limit. As you can see, these are very simple, very straightforward, and very doable best practices in terms of making the best of your meetings, making your meetings most efficient. Don't let the simplicity of these suggestions fool you. It's often the simplest ideas that are the most powerful because they're the easiest to implement. As today's episode comes to an end, let's review the ideas that were presented here today. Schedule meetings as a last resort and only if there are no other options for conveying the information to others in a more efficient way, such as email or PowerPoint presentations. Make sure that your meetings have a purpose and a goal and an itinerary. Your meetings should be structured and timed. Always strive to make them as efficient as possible. You may want to record your meetings in some way and make sure that there's always one person leading the meeting. A facilitator is critical to keeping everyone on track. Only invite the people who need to be there and give them an option to join you virtually or in person. You may also consider walking meetings, as those can be a nice change of pace. Don't let the meeting become a runaway train. That means stay on track and stay in control. Don't let any other people or topics hijack the meeting. As the week unfolds, I invite you to examine meetings as they play out in your own organization. How do they compare to the best practices presented here today? Do they fall in line with what was discussed here, or do they fall short? Are the meetings efficient and helpful, or are they time wasters? How can you incorporate the suggestions made here today in ways that will help you to make your meetings as efficient as possible? Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I hope that you will join me again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.